The first thing you learn at 3,000 feet is that the Earth has a pulse. Not a metaphor, not some spiritual nonsense miners tell tourists. I mean, you can feel it, a low, tidal pressure in your inner ear that shifts every few hours as the rock above you breathes with geothermal heat and the weight of a half-mile of granite. You stop noticing it after about day 2. By day 6, your body synchronizes with it. Your heart rate drops, your breathing slows. You become part of the geology. I was shift supervisor on sub-level 12 of the Gage Halston copper-gold operation, southeast Nevada, about 40 miles from anything that could be charitably called a town. 12 people underground, myself included. 7-day rotations, surface break, repeat. We'd been running that cycle for 14 months without serious incident, which in mining means you're due. My name is Colton Rowe. I was 36, divorced, living in a rented double-wide in Tonopah with a truck payment I was 3 months behind on. I supervised because no one else wanted the clipboard. The guys underground respected me in the limited way miners respect anyone I didn't panic. I didn't short their safety checks, and I brought an extra thermos of coffee on Thursdays because the galley pot tasted like diesel runoff. That was the full scope of my authority. A clipboard, a radio, a hard hat with a cracked lamp bracket I kept meaning to replace. Day 6 of rotation, March 11th. We were running a lateral drift extension on sub-level 12, chasing a vein the geologists had tagged as high yield. The rock was cooperative. Guys were in decent spirits. Danny Villanueva was telling some story about his daughter's soccer tournament that he'd been stretching across 3 shifts, adding details I was fairly sure he was inventing. Kip Overstreet and Marcel Fontaine were running the bolter at the drift face. Wanda Simovic, one of 2 women on my crew, the better driller of the pair, was replacing a hydraulic line on the jumbo with a patience that bordered on surgical. The intercom cracked at 14:47. Not the shift change tone, not the weather update we sometimes got piped down. A voice. Brenda Coe, surface operations coordinator, the woman who ran the cage schedule and knew every man and woman underground by their boot size. Sub-level 12, this is surface. Colton, you there? I picked up. Yeah, Brenda, go ahead. Static for 3 seconds. Then her voice came back, and it had a texture I'd never heard from her. Brenda was a 53-year-old woman who'd worked mining operations since she was 19. I'd seen her handle a cage malfunction, a gas alarm, and a man with a severed finger on the same afternoon without raising her vocal pitch by a single note. She was whispering. Colton, I need you to keep your crew at current position. Do not send anyone to the shaft station. The cage is inoperative. We have a situation on surface that I cannot fully describe on this channel. I'm going to switch to the emergency frequency. Please confirm you copy. Danny stopped talking. Everyone in earshot had frozen, which was most of the drift. Sound carries underground in ways that surface people never understand. It doesn't fade. It folds around corners. It lives in the walls. Copy, Brenda. Switching to emergency. I turned the dial. The emergency frequency was a direct hard line to the surface control room, bypassing the relay repeaters. We tested it every rotation. It had never been used for an actual emergency in the 18 months I'd worked Gage Halston. When Brenda's voice came through again, there was a sound behind her. Multiple sounds. A door being struck. Not knocked on, struck rhythmically. And underneath that, something I could not categorize, a vocal sound. Human adjacent, but wrong in a way that made the hair on my forearms lift inside my coveralls. Colton. There are people on the surface who are not acting like people. I don't know how else they came from the highway. About 30, 40 minutes ago. 6 of them. Then more. The security gate didn't hold them because they aren't responding to anything. Carter shot one, and it did not stop. I looked at my crew. 11 faces in hard hat lamplight, every one of them watching me. Brenda, are you safe? The rhythmic striking behind her got louder. I've locked the control room. The cage is inoperable because I cut power to the hoist. If I hadn't, some of them were walking toward the shaft head. I think they heard the motor. Colton, I cut the cage to keep them from coming down to you. She had stranded us to save us. How many surface personnel are accounted for? I don't know. I can see the yard from the window. I can see... Colton, I need to go. I need to move to the equipment bay while the hall is clear. I'll contact you when I can. Stay on emergency frequency. Do not attempt to ascend. Brenda. The line went to static. 12 people. 3,000 feet of rock. No cage. The Gage Halston shaft was a single vertical bore, 22 feet in diameter, serviced by one double-deck cage that ran on a cable hoist powered from a surface motor house. When Brenda cut the hoist, she didn't just turn off the elevator, she severed our only engineered path to daylight. There was an emergency ladder system built into a secondary raise, a ventilation shaft about 9 feet wide that ran from sublevel 8 to the surface. The ladders were steel, bolted to the rock wall, with rest platforms every 100 feet. From sublevel 12, you'd first have to climb an internal raise from 12 to 8. About 800 vertical feet of rough bolted ladder through a bore that was never designed for human transit, then switched to the emergency ladders for the remaining 2,200 feet. 3,000 feet of vertical climbing, in mining gear, through shafts with variable ventilation and no lighting. I did the math while everyone watched me. All right, I said. Nobody's going anywhere right now. What the hell does that mean? People not acting like people. That was Kip, who was built like a fire hydrant and handled ambiguity about as well as one. What is she talking about? I don't know. She said she'd contact us again. So we just sit here? We sit here. We have air. We have water from the sub-level supply. We have food for another 36 hours in the galley. We're safe. We're trapped, said Luis Medina, quiet and accurate, from the back of the group. I didn't argue with him. The first hour was restless but manageable. People talked, speculated. Danny figured it was a chemical spill from the highway. There was a transport corridor about 15 miles east that moved industrial chemicals. Some kind of contamination event. People walking around confused, disoriented. Happens with certain exposures. He said this with the confidence of a man who'd watched a documentary once. But it was a reasonable enough theory. And reasonable theories are currency when you're buried in rock with no information. Wanda didn't speculate. She walked to the sub-level supply cache and started inventorying. Water cans, MRE-style ration packs, medical kit, batteries. She wrote everything down on the back of a blasting log and brought it to me like a field report. 47 liters of water, 18 ration packs, 12 lamp batteries, 9 of which are above 50%. 1 trauma kit, basic. 1 oxygen resuscitator, probably functional. Probably? Last inspection stickers 11 months old. I took the list. Thank you. She looked at me with an expression I recognized from long shifts, not panic, not calm, but the particular patience of someone who has decided to be useful because the alternative is unacceptable. Marcel Fontaine, the crew's other bolter operator, had his phone out and was staring at it like it owed him something. No signal, obviously. Marcel, put it away. Save the battery. If we get to a level with relay access. There's no relay that goes through 3,000 feet of rock, Colton. I know. Save the battery anyway. The second hour, I tried the intercom every 10 minutes. Nothing. Not static, nothing. The hard line was intact, meaning the cable was unbroken, but no one was picking up on the surface end. Brenda had said she was moving to the equipment bay. That was a different building from the control room. She might have made it. She might not have. I kept that thought in a locked room in my head and stood in front of my crew like a man with a plan. By hour 3, the conversation had cycled through chemical spill, terrorist attack, military incident, and had landed with the reluctance of people who know exactly what they're describing. On the word nobody wanted to say. Tommy Harker said it. Tommy was 23, the youngest on the crew, a driller's assistant who sent half his paycheck home to his mother in Elko. He was sitting on an overturned bucket near the charging station, turning a bolt between his fingers like a rosary. "It's like those movies," he said. "Like those you know, when people get sick and they don't stop." Nobody told him he was wrong. That was the moment I understood we were in real trouble. Not because of the word, but because 11 people underground with no information had all, independently, arrived at the same impossible conclusion, and not one of them was laughing. Brenda came back at hour 5. The intercom coughed twice, and her voice dropped into the sub-level like a rock down a well. Thinner now. She was breathing harder, but measured. Still Brenda. "Colton, confirm. Here. Full crew, 12, all at sub-level 12 drift. What's your situation?" "I'm in the equipment bay. Doors reinforced. I have the yard camera feed on the maintenance monitor." The surface compound is there are approximately 20 to 25 individuals in the yard and access road. They are not responsive to voice, horn, or light stimulus. 3 surface personnel made it to the bay with me. Carter, Jimenez, and Dale Erickson from geology. "Anyone injured?" A pause. Carter was bitten on the forearm during the initial contact. He's showing elevated temperature. Jimenez cleaned and wrapped it, but... Another pause. "Colton, a bite is how this transfers." "I don't know how I know that. I've been watching the camera feed for 4 hours, and the pattern is... it's a bite. Everyone in the yard who is now walking was bitten first." Behind me, I could feel 12 bodies listening. "Brenda, we need to discuss ascent options. The cage hoist is surface-controlled only. I could restore power from here, but the motor house is across the yard. 60 feet of open ground. With what's out there, I can't guarantee I'd make it. And if I power the hoist, the motor noise will draw them. You'd step out of the cage into the middle of them." "What about the emergency raise? Sub-level 8 to surface?" "The raise exits through a ventilation housing on the east side of the compound, near the old tailings. That area had fewer of them last time I checked the camera. It's possible. But Colton, the raise from 12 to 8 hasn't been inspected in 7 months. The last report flagged corrosion on the ladder brackets at the 10 to 9 transition. I don't know if those were repaired." "They weren't," said Wanda behind me. I filed the follow-up. It was deferred to Q2 maintenance. Deferred, the most dangerous word in mining. "So we have a corroded section somewhere in the middle of an 800-foot climb through an uninspected raise," I said. "Yes. And even if we clear that, 2,200 feet of emergency ladders to surface, then we exit into a compound with unknown hostile numbers." "Yes." Kip stepped forward. "What's the alternative? We sit here until the water runs out?" He wasn't wrong. 47 liters for 12 people was roughly 4 days of survival rationing. The air was recycled through the ventilation system, which was powered by surface electricity. If the grid failed, or if someone on the surface interfered with the fans, we'd have a different clock to worry about. Brenda, what's the grid status? Stable for now. The mine's on the regional grid, not local generation. But I don't know how long regional infrastructure holds if this is widespread. Is it widespread? For the first time, she hesitated long enough that I could hear her swallow. The radio in the bay picks up regional emergency channels. Before the stations went to automated loops, there were reports from Reno, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City. This isn't local, Colton. The silence underground was absolute. Not the silence of empty space, the silence of 12 people processing the same sentence simultaneously and finding no words adequate. I'm going to try to reach the motor house tonight, Brenda said. After dark. They seem less directed at night. Not slower, just less focused on visual tracking. If I can restore the hoist, and you can get the cage called from the sub-level station. Brenda, no. We'll take the raise. The raise isn't safe. You crossing 60 feet of open ground to a motor house isn't safe either. I know this surface, Colton. I've worked it for 11 years. And I've got 12 people down here who are my responsibility. I'm not adding your life to that by asking you to run across a yard full of... You're not asking. I'm offering. I closed my eyes. The pulse of the earth pressed against my temples. Give us 12 hours, I said. Let me send 2 people up the raise to inspect it. If it's passable, we'll start the full ascent tomorrow. If it's not, then we talk about the hoist. A long breath through the speaker. 12 hours. I'll be here. I picked Wanda and Luis for the inspection climb. Wanda because she'd filed the corrosion report and knew exactly what we were looking for. Luis because he was the quietest person on my crew, which underground translates directly to the most careful. He'd been a competitive rock climber in his 20s sport climbing, the kind with ropes and harnesses and beer at the base camp afterward. He'd told me once that mining was climbing in reverse, and that the only difference was that the mountain had already fallen on you. They geared up at the base of the internal raise headlamps, backup lights, a 20-meter rope, and a small toolkit with a pry bar, wrenches, and a corrosion tester that Wanda had liberated from the maintenance locker. I watched them clip in and start climbing. And within 3 minutes, their headlamp beams were just moving stars in a vertical throat of darkness. The rest of us waited. I'm going to describe waiting at 3,000 feet because it's different from any other kind of waiting. There's no wind, no weather, no change of light. The temperature stays at exactly 109 degrees Fahrenheit, which the ventilation system reduces to about 85 at the work face, and the humidity holds steady at something that makes your skin feel like a damp sponge that will never dry. Time moves by shift bell and wristwatch only. Without surface cues, your circadian rhythm disassembles within 48 hours. By day 6, most people are sleeping in fragmented 2-hour blocks. When I tell you that we waited for Wanda and Luis, I mean we existed in a pressurized stillness that made every cough, every boot scrape, every drip of groundwater through the rock seams sound like a telegraph message we couldn't decode. Danny tried to keep talking. He'd moved on from his daughter's soccer tournament to a story about his brother-in-law's fishing boat. But the narrative kept collapsing because he'd pause, listen upward toward the rays, as if he might hear the climbers, then forget where he was in the story. Tommy Harker hadn't moved from his bucket. He was still turning the bolt between his fingers. At one point, he looked up at me and said, "My mom doesn't drive. If she had to leave Elko, she wouldn't be able to. She takes the bus." Tommy. I'm just saying, she takes the bus. When we get to surface, we'll figure out communication. One step at a time. He nodded, but I could see the step he was on was about 4,000 miles from the step I was describing. Kip paced. Kip always paced when he didn't have a machine to operate. His body required resistance the way some people require noise. He walked the drift back and forth, 19 paces each way. And every time he reached the end closest to the raise entrance, he'd stop and stare up into it like a dog at a treed animal. Marcel sat against the wall with his phone open to his photos, scrolling slowly. I didn't look at what he was seeing. You don't invade that space. The other 6, Pete Kowalski, Rob and Rita Sandoval. Married couple, only married couple I'd ever supervised underground. Janet Cho, Ernesto Baz, and Dave Flicker Maglione. Earned the nickname from a hard hat lamp that strobed for an entire shift before he fixed it. Arranged themselves in the drift like passengers in a waiting room that was never going to announce a boarding call. 2 hours and 41 minutes. That's how long it took. Wanda's headlamp appeared first, descending, and I could tell from the way she moved careful, deliberate, not rushing, that the news was mixed. She unclipped at the base and pulled her hard hat off. Her face was streaked with rust-colored grime, and her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from sustained grip exertion. 3 sections, she said. Base to sub-level 10 is solid. Good brackets, good rungs, minor surface rust only. The 10 to 9 transition is the problem. 4 consecutive brackets have lost more than 60% of their wall thickness. 2 rungs are completely gone, just the stubs where they bolted in. And there's a lateral crack in the rock wall at that section, about 2 inches wide, that's letting groundwater run directly over the metalwork. Passable? For one person at a time, moving carefully, with someone braced above or below to bridge the gap at the missing rungs. Not passable for 12 people in sequence at any speed. The brackets will take the load of maybe 6 transits before one gives way. And above that section, Luis answered, still hanging from his harness at the base of the raise. Clean from 9 to 8. We topped out at the sub-level 8 station. The connection to the emergency ladder system is intact. From there, it's standard ladder enclosed, maintained, designed for evacuation. But we can't get all 12 people through the corroded section. Wanda looked at me. No. The math was simple and terrible. 6 transits through the corroded section before structural failure became likely. 12 people on my crew. I gathered everyone in the drift and explained it without decoration. I've learned that miners respond to information better than reassurance. Tell them exactly what's wrong and they'll solve it. Tell them it's going to be fine and they'll assume you're lying about something worse. So half of us go and half of us stay? Kip said it like he was reading it off a wall. Unless we can reinforce the section. Wanda, what would it take? She'd already been thinking about it. Steel plating bolted over the corroded brackets. We'd need to drill new anchor points into solid rock above and below the damaged zone. Mount plates that bridge the gap and re-weld or bolt replacement rungs across the missing sections. With the tools on this sublevel, maybe we could fabricate something. But we're talking 8-10 hours of work at height, in a confined space, with improvised materials. We have steel down here, Marcel said. Mesh bolts, rock bolt plates. If we cut and reshape, it's not ideal steel. It's not structural grade for this application, but it would take human weight for a limited number of crossings. How many? Wanda closed her eyes, calculating. If we do it right, maybe 20 additional transits before I'd lose confidence. That's enough for all 12 of us, with margin. Then that's the plan, I said. Fabrication team works through the night, Everyone else rests. We start the ascent at... I'm not going. The voice came from the back of the group. Roy Gallegos. I hadn't mentioned Roy yet, because Roy was the kind of crew member who made himself invisible through competence. He did his job perfectly, spoke minimally, and caused zero friction. He was the explosives handler, certified in blasting for 12 years. And he had a way of standing in a room that made you forget he was there until you needed something detonated. Everyone turned. I talked to Brenda on the intercom while you were briefing them, Roy said. She patched through a regional broadcast. Elko was overrun 14 hours ago. He paused. My wife and kids are in Elko. Nobody spoke. I called the relay. I tried the phone patch through the emergency system. Nothing. No cellular, no landline, no answer at the school, no answer at the house. Brenda says the highway between here and Elko, as she says the camera on the access road, shows vehicles stopped in both directions as far as the lens can see. He looked at me with an expression that contained no panic, no grief, and no appeal. It was the face of a man who had completed an internal calculation and was simply reporting the result. There's nothing for me up there, Colton. My family is dead or gone, and I have no way to reach them. And no vehicle waiting on the surface, even if I did. I have food and water for one person for what, Wanda? 3 weeks, if I ration hard. About that, Wanda said quietly. I'll maintain the sub-level. Keep the intercom open. Monitor ventilation. If the grid holds, this is the safest place within 100 miles. No one's coming down here. Nothing can reach me. I stared at him. Roy? It's not a discussion. I'm telling you what I'm doing. And here was the thing that I've carried with me every day since. That I will carry until I stop carrying anything. He wasn't wrong. Strictly on the math. Staying underground alone with 3 weeks of supply in a sealed environment with functioning air on was a more rational survival decision than climbing 3,000 feet to emerge into an overrun compound and then walking 40 miles to nowhere with no vehicle and no destination. Roy had done the calculation. Roy was right. But the look on Tommy Harker's face when Roy said it, the way Tommy's hand stopped turning the bolt and his eyes went wide, that told me something the math couldn't hold. If I let Roy stay, I was establishing that a man could choose to die alone underground, and his supervisor would allow it. I was making the darkness a valid option. 12 hours ago, I told Brenda I wasn't going to add her life to my responsibility by asking her to cross that yard, I said. She told me she wasn't asking, she was offering. I looked at Roy. You're telling me you're choosing this, and I hear you. But I need you to hear me. If you stay, I can't come back for you. The section we're reinforcing won't survive a return trip. This is a one-direction exit. If you stay permanently. I understand that. Your kids might be alive, Roy. They might. And I might reach them through 300 miles of highway that Brenda just described as a parking lot full of the dead. Or I might die on the surface in the first hour, and then I'm no good to anyone. Kip stepped forward. Man, you can't just... Let him finish, I said. Roy looked at the group. At each person, one at a time, the way you look at people you're memorizing. I'm staying. I wish you all safe passage. I mean that. The fabrication took 11 hours. Wanda, Marcel, and Luis worked the corroded section while the rest of us cut and shaped steel plates from rock bolt stock on the sub-level floor. We used the hydraulic shears from the Jumbo, a portable welder that Pete Kowalski coaxed back to life from the maintenance cage, and a level of collective improvisation that would have made our safety inspector write a report long enough to qualify as a novella. I worked beside Tommy at the cutting station. He didn't talk about his mother in Elko again. He cut steel with a focus that bordered on meditative, measuring each piece twice with a grease pencil and a tape before committing to the shear. Every piece he finished, he set in a neat row on the ground beside him, like he was building a model of something only he could see. At hour 9 of the fabrication, Brenda came back on the intercom. "Colton," Carter turned. I stepped away from the group. "What do you mean, turned?" "His fever spiked around midnight. Jimenez had him restrained. We'd agreed on that after what I told you about the bites. He stopped breathing at 0340. At 0347, he stood up. The restraints held, but he, Colton, the sound he made. It wasn't pain. It was something else. Jimenez put him down with a geological pick." I leaned my forehead against the cool rock wall and closed my eyes. "Jimenez she's functional. She's steady. Dale hasn't spoken in about 2 hours, but he's breathing. I need you to know that the yard count is higher. I stopped counting at 60. They're coming from the highway in a continuous drift, not organized, just flowing in. The motor house is not accessible anymore. The cage is permanently offline as an option. We're almost done with the raise reinforcement. We'll start climbing in 2 hours. The ventilation housing exit on the east side still looks clearer than the rest. Maybe a dozen in that area. You'll need to be fast and quiet when you top out." "Understood. Brenda, when we reach surface, we're coming to you." A pause. "Don't. Get clear of the compound. Head for the access road and move east toward the highway. There's a water cache and emergency supply in the Geological Survey shack about 4 miles down the ridge trail. Dale says it's stocked. We're not leaving you. Colton, I'm in a reinforced equipment bay with food, water, and a radio. I can survive here for weeks. You will have 11 people, sorry. You said one is staying. Roy Gallegos. You will have 11 people emerging into the open with no vehicle, no weapons, and no shelter. Your priority is getting them clear, not rescuing me." I didn't answer because the answer I wanted to give was insubordinate to the situation. "I'll stay on the radio," she said. "I'll guide you to the vent exit and tell you when to move. That's how I help, not by making you cross a compound for me. Brenda, 2 hours. Tell me when you're ready." We formed up at the base of the raise at 0600 by my wristwatch, though underground, that number was purely administrative. 11 people in hard hats with headlamps, carrying nothing that wasn't essential. Water divided evenly into personal bottles. The trauma kit, 4 lamp batteries, the 20-meter rope, a pry bar, and a fire axe that Rita Sandoval had found bolted to a wall bracket near the emergency station, behind a layer of dust so thick she'd mistaken it for a pipe. Roy stood at the base and watched us gear up. I'd spent the last hour with him, going over the sub-level systems, water shutoffs, ventilation dampers, the intercom protocol, the location of every supply cache on sub-level 12. He'd listened with the polite attention of a man being told things he already knew. And when I'd finished, he'd shaken my hand. "I left a letter in my locker," he said. "Top shelf, manila envelope. If you ever get somewhere where mail works again, I'll find it. It's for my daughter, Mariana. She's 9. He cleared his throat. It was already written. I wrote it before the rotation. I always do, just in case. I realized then that Roy's decision to stay wasn't the sudden calculus I'd imagined. It was the final position of a man who had always been preparing for the version of the mine that didn't let him leave. He'd written the letter because he'd always known the rock might keep him. The outbreak just selected the specific geometry. Wanda went first. She knew the route, she knew the reinforced section, and she could test each bracket before committing weight. Luis went second as safety line. Then one at a time. Danny, Marcel, Pete, Janet, Ernesto, Rita, Rob, Flicker. I went last. Tommy stood at the base, waiting for his turn, and looked back at Roy. "Come with us," Tommy said. "Take care of yourself, kid. My mom would let you stay with us, and Elko, if we find her." Roy smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him smile during the entire rotation. "Climb, Tommy." Tommy climbed. I stepped to the base, gripped the first rung, and looked at Roy one final time. He was standing in the drift with his hands in his coverall pockets, backlit by the string lights of sub-level 12, looking exactly like a man standing in his living room watching guests leave after dinner. "Roy, go, Colton." I climbed. The raise was hell. Not dangerous hell the reinforced section held. Wanda's fabrication work was precise, and the brackets took each person's weight without audible protest, but the kind of hell that is simply your body fighting gravity in a hot, dark, vertical tube for an extended period. 800 feet, rung after rung. The rock was close on all sides, close enough that my shoulders brushed the walls when I shifted my grip, and the air was thick with moisture and the mineral smell of exposed copper ore. I could hear the person above me, Tommy, by the rhythm of his boots on the rungs. Every few minutes, a call would cascade down from Wanda at the top. "Section clear, continue." And we'd move upward through the throat of the mountain like blood cells through a vein, single file, nobody rushing, nobody stopping. The corroded section announced itself by the sound of water. A lateral seep was running across the rock wall, and when my headlamp hit the reinforcement plates Wanda's team had installed, they gleamed wet and strange in the light, like surgical implants in living rock. I could see where the original brackets had corroded to lace thin reddish remnants that would have folded under a child's weight. The new plates bridged the gap with ugly functionality. Oversized, over-bolted, rock bolt stock welded into shapes that no engineering manual would recognize, but that held. I crossed the section in 4 careful moves, my hands on the new steel, my feet on the replacement rungs, and for a span of about 12 seconds, I was hanging over a 400-foot drop supported by improvised metalwork built by a team of copper miners using a borrowed welder and mining supplies. I did not look down. Looking down is not a decision you make at that point. It's a decision your survival instinct makes for you. And it is correct. Above the corroded section, the raise opened slightly, maybe 12 feet across, and the air quality improved as the ventilation system drew surface air downward through the shaft. I could smell something different in it. Not the mineral soup atmosphere of the deep levels. Something organic, distant, unplaceable. At sub-level 8, the raise connected to the emergency ladder system through a horizontal transfer gallery. Wanda was waiting there, counting heads as each person pulled themselves over the lip of the raise onto the solid floor of the gallery. When I arrived, she had a number ready. 11, all accounted for. I rolled onto my back on the gallery floor and stared at the rock ceiling 4 feet above my face and breathed. 2,200 feet to go, Luis said from somewhere to my right. The easy part. Nobody laughed because he wasn't joking. The emergency ladder system was maintained, inspected, enclosed in a steel-lined shaft with rest platforms every 100 feet. Compared to what we'd just climbed, it was a staircase. 2,200 vertical feet of staircase, but staircase nonetheless. 5-minute rest, I said. Water break. Then we go. Danny pulled himself to sitting and looked at the group. I never finished the story about my daughter's tournament. Danny, I swear to God, Kip started. She scored the winning goal, off a header, from a corner kick, My kid, who is 4'11" and afraid of escalators, headed a ball into the net to win the district championship. He grinned, and the grin was a broken thing, held together by willpower and the specific mania of a father who has spent the last 12 hours not knowing whether his daughter is alive. I just wanted to finish the story. That's a good story, Danny, I said. She'll tell me about it again when I see her, he said. She'll tell it better. We stood. We climbed. The emergency ladders took 4 hours and ate everything we had left. Not just physically, though, by the end. Rita was climbing with her eyes closed, navigating by hand feel alone, because the headlamp battery had died 200 feet from the top. And Ernesto's knee had swollen to the point where each step was a negotiation between his leg and his determination. It ate us psychologically. Because the closer we got to the surface, the more the air changed. And the sounds changed. And the smell, that organic, unplaceable smell I'd first detected at sub-level 8, became something I could now identify with terrible specificity. It was decay, human decay, carried on surface air, drawn downward through the ventilation system, diluted by 3,000 feet of mixing, but unmistakable to anyone who has ever been near it. Nobody mentioned it. We climbed through it like a weather system we couldn't avoid. At the top of the emergency ladder shaft, there was a steel hatch that opened into the ventilation, housing a concrete structure about the size of a 2-car garage, partially buried in the hillside on the east perimeter of the mine compound. Wanda reached it first, radioed Brenda on the portable unit we'd brought from below. "Brenda, we're at the vent housing. 11 souls, ready to open." "Copy. I've got camera on the east yard. I count 9, no, 11 in your immediate area. They're dispersed, not clustered at the housing. You'll have a window if you move north along the hillside toward the geological trail. Do not go through the main yard. Do not approach the shaft head or the motor house." "Understood. When you open the hatch, do it slowly. Any sharp metallic sound draws them. They respond to irregular noise much more than steady ambient. Open it, hold position, and let me read their reaction on camera." Wanda looked at me. I nodded. She turned the handle. The hatch unsealed with a sound like a refrigerator opening, a soft suck of pressure differential as the underground air met the surface atmosphere. Daylight fell into the shaft for the first time in 7 days. And 11 people flinched simultaneously. Not from danger, from the sun. We'd been under artificial light for so long that actual daylight felt like a physical substance entering our eyes. Wanda pushed the hatch open 6 inches, then 12, then all the way. I could hear the outside world. Wind, actual wind, moving through actual terrain. A sound so commonplace that you never notice it until you've spent a week without it, and then it hits you like music. And underneath the wind, something else. A low, irregular, collective murmur from the direction of the main compound. Not voices, not words. The sound of dozens of mouths producing a vocalization that had no communicative content, just the mechanical output of lungs and vocal cords operating without a mind behind them. "No reaction on camera," Brenda said. "They haven't registered the hatch. Move now. North along the hill. Stay below the ridgeline. The trail entrance is about 200 yards past the old core shed." One by one, we pulled ourselves out of the ventilation housing into the Nevada morning. I had spent 7 days in a world without sky. The sky above the mine compound was pale blue, enormous, and utterly indifferent. I stood on the hillside in my filthy coveralls, blinking against the light, and for approximately 3 seconds, nothing else existed. Just the air, just the open, just the absolute liberation of not having rock above my head. Then I saw the compound. The Gage Halston surface facility was about 300 yards downhill. The main office, the motor house, the cage head frame, the equipment bay where Brenda was sheltered, the geological lab, the parking area where our trucks sat in neat rows. From the hillside, I could see all of it, and what I saw erased the 3 seconds of relief like acid on paper. They were everywhere. Not massed, not organized, not doing anything with purpose, just present. Distributed across the yard and access road like a crowd that had forgotten what it was gathering for. Some standing, some walking in short, directionless paths. Some simply tilted against structures like discarded mannequins propped at angles that no conscious human being would tolerate. I couldn't count them. I stopped trying at 40 because the numbers stopped mattering. What mattered was the space between them and us, and the fact that none of them had looked uphill yet. "Move," I whispered. We moved north along the hillside in a loose line, staying below the ridgeline the way Brenda had instructed. The terrain was rocky scrub, juniper and sage, hard ground that didn't give under our mining boots. Wanda led. Luis brought up the rear. I walked the middle, counting heads compulsively. Danny, Kip, Marcel, Pete, Janet, Ernesto, Rita, Rob, Tommy, Flicker. 40 yards from the vent housing, Tommy stopped. "My truck's down there," he said. He was looking at the parking area. "My keys are in my locker in the—" "Tommy, no. I could drive to Elko. It's 5 hours. Less if the highway is—" "Tommy." I put my hand on his shoulder. Not hard, just present. "The highway is not passable," Brenda told us, "and your locker is inside the main building, in the middle of them." "My mom doesn't drive." "I know." His face did something I don't have the vocabulary for. A kind of controlled demolition from the inside. Every support beam giving way in sequence, while the exterior held its shape through pure structural memory. He didn't cry, he didn't shout. He just stood there on a hillside in Nevada and absorbed the full weight of a fact he'd been holding at arm's length for 18 hours. I waited. The group waited. Nobody told him to move. Nobody said it would be okay. They waited because they understood that this was a doorway he had to walk through alone, and that rushing him would break something that patience might preserve. He took a breath. He turned north. He walked. We reached the trail entrance in 7 minutes. It was exactly where Brenda had described a narrow gravel path that cut northeast through the scrub, marked by a geological survey stake with orange flagging tape that had faded to pink. The trail led away from the compound, away from the highway, away from everything. 4 miles to the survey shack, I said. Single file, quiet. Rest when we get there. "Colton," Brenda's voice on the portable. "You're clear on camera. I'm losing visual as you enter the tree line. I'll stay on this frequency. Check in every hour." "Copy. Thank you, Brenda." "Don't thank me. Just keep walking." We entered the tree line and the compound disappeared behind us, and the sound of the dead, that low, aimless murmur, faded into the wind and was gone. The survey shack was a corrugated steel structure about the size of a single wide trailer, bolted to a concrete pad on a ridge overlooking a drainage basin. It had been used by Dale Erickson's geological team during the exploration phase of the mine's development, and it was stocked the way field geologists stock remote camps. Practical, thorough, unimaginative. Canned food, water jugs, propane stove, 2 cots, a folding table, a radio that ran on a car battery. Maps, topographic, geological, access road. We arrived midday. 11 people filed into a space designed for 3, and for the first 30 minutes, nobody did anything except sit on any available surface and exist without climbing. I spread the maps on the folding table and tried to think. The nearest town was Tonopah, 41 miles northwest by road. The highway route 376 north to 6 west was, per Brenda's report, impassable. No vehicles, no clear lanes, no infrastructure. The secondary roads were ranch tracks and mining access routes, unpaved, poorly marked, navigable by truck, but not by 11 people on foot. South was desert. East was more desert. West was the Tokima Range, 7,000 and 8,000 feet, snow-covered in March, passable only with equipment we didn't have. "We need a vehicle," Kip said, stating the obvious with the confidence of a man who believes saying things aloud makes them solvable. "The compound has vehicles, 20 of them, all inside a perimeter with 60-plus infected." "Not the compound. Somewhere else. The highway, a ranch, something." Wanda was studying the map. "There's a BLM maintenance yard here." She pointed. "About 7 miles southeast, on the other side of this drainage. They keep road equipment, graders, water trucks, maybe a pickup. 7 miles through open terrain. Mostly drainage bottom, cover from the basin walls, limited visibility from the highway." I looked at the group. Exhausted faces, swollen hands from 8 hours of ladder rungs. Ernesto's knee, Rita's dead headlamp eyes, Danny staring at a wall. "We rest here tonight. Full night. Food, water, sleep. Tomorrow a small team goes for the BLM yard. Everyone else stays, conserves, and monitors Brenda." There was no argument. Nobody had the energy for argument. They had the energy to eat cold canned chili and drink water that tasted like plastic, and lie on a concrete floor in a steel box on a Nevada ridge, and fall asleep in their mining coveralls while the afternoon sun turned the shack into an oven. I stayed awake. Someone had to hold the radio. Someone had to be the one who didn't sleep. At 1600, Brenda checked in. "Stable here. Jimenez and Dale are resting. Yard count holding steady. No change in behavior pattern. Grid still up. Any new radio traffic?" "Military frequency had a burst about an hour ago. Couldn't decode it encrypted. But it was structured. Someone's still operating." "Direction?" "Couldn't tell. But it was strong. Close-ish. Maybe Nellis, maybe Creech." "Military." The word sat in the air like a flare. "I'll listen through the night," she said. "If I get anything clear, I'll relay." "Brenda, how are you actually?" A pause. The kind of pause that contains an entire answer that the speaker chooses not to deliver. "I'm operational, Colton. That's what I am." The team for the BLM yard was me, Wanda, Lewis, and Kip. We left at 0500 the next morning, moving southeast through the drainage basin in pre-dawn gray light. The desert at that hour is a grayscale photograph. Terrain. Shapes without color, terrain without depth. Everything reduced to the contrast between dark ground and less dark sky. We didn't talk. 4 people walking in single file through a rocky wash, boots on gravel, the sound of our own breathing, the loudest thing in the world. The drainage basin ran between 2 low ridges, maybe 60 feet high on each side, covered in scrub juniper and the occasional pinyon pine that looked like it had been trying to die for 50 years and failing. The footing was loose alluvial gravel, the kind that shifts under your weight and turns a straight walk into a constant series of micro-corrections. At mile 3, we found the first vehicle, a white sedan, off the road at an angle that suggested the driver had simply stopped steering. Both front doors open. A child's car seat in the back, empty. No blood, no damage. Just an abandoned machine on the edge of a drainage basin with no explanation, and a car seat that I tried very hard not to think about for the remaining 4 miles. At mile 6, the drainage intersected a graded dirt road that led to the BLM yard. We could see the compound from a quarter mile out of a chain-link perimeter around a gravel lot with 3 large maintenance buildings, a fuel station, and a vehicle pool. Kip raised the binoculars. Gates open. I see 2 trucks. No 3. One's a flatbed. 2 pickups. No movement. We approached carefully. The gate was open because someone had driven through it without stopping tire tracks, cut through the gravel at an angle that ignored the actual gate opening by about 4 feet, bending the chain link into a shape it was never designed to take. Inside the yard, one of the maintenance bay doors was open. The bay was empty except for a road grader with a flat tire and a workbench covered in tools. The 2 pickups were parked near the fuel station. Both had keys in the ignition. Both were Federal Fleet vehicles, white, unmarked, with the BLM logo stenciled on the doors in green. Wanda checked the first one. Half tank, batteries live. She turned the key and the engine caught on the first try, and the sound of a running motor was so jarringly normal that all 4 of us stood perfectly still for a moment, listening to it like it was music we hadn't heard in years. The second truck started too, both operational, enough fuel to reach somewhere. Tonopah, a highway interchange, a military installation, if the encrypted radio traffic Brenda had heard was what we hoped. Then Luis said, "Colton." He was standing at the back of the maintenance bay, near a side door that led to the yard's administrative office. A small concrete building. The door was locked from the outside with a padlock. That was wrong. You don't padlock a building from the outside during business hours. You padlock it when you leave, or when you're keeping something in. Luis pointed at the ground near the door. Scratches. Deep scratches in the concrete pad, concentrated around the base of the door, in an arc that described the reach of someone on the other side. And from inside, faintly, a sound. Not the murmur I'd heard at the compound. A single voice. Low, steady, rhythmic, breathing. "Could be an infected locked in there," Kip said. "Could be a person," Wanda said. We listened. The breathing was irregular, but present. Not the mechanical vocalization of the dead. I'd heard enough of that from the compound to know the difference. This had pauses, shifts. The small variations that meant a diaphragm was being controlled by a brain that was still making decisions. "Hello?" I said it at normal volume, and the word felt absurd in the silence. The breathing stopped. Then a voice, hoarse, cracked, but human. "Are you bit?" "No, 4 people. We're from the Gage Halston mine." "How long you been underground?" 7 days. A long silence. Then, "There's a key on a nail to the left of the door frame. Eyelet about head height." Luis found it. A small brass key on a ring. He looked at me. I nodded. The padlock opened. The door swung inward. Inside the office, a desk, a filing cabinet, a water cooler, a cot made from chair cushions. A woman sat against the far wall with a shotgun across her knees. She was maybe 60. BLM uniform. Badge on her chest read Holverson. Her left arm was wrapped in what looked like a torn curtain. Makeshift sling, the fabric stained dark at the elbow. "I locked myself in from the outside 5 days ago," she said. "Used a stick through the padlock hasp and pulled the door shut. If I turned, I didn't want to get out." "Did you?" She looked at her arm. Fell off the grader. Broke it in 2 places. Watched myself for 72 hours for fever, discoloration, behavioral change. Nothing. Not a bite. Then why stay locked in? Because I wasn't sure. And I had water from the cooler and crackers from my desk, and I figured if I was wrong about the arm, better I was behind a locked door. Wanda knelt beside her and checked the arm, gently, with the medical knowledge that comes from 20 years in an industry where injuries are scheduled rather than accidental. Clean fracture, both bones. No infection, no discoloration. You're not bit. I know that now. You stayed locked in a room for 5 days with a broken arm on the chance that you might be infected. Holverson looked at Wanda with the flat patience of a woman who had lived alone in the desert long enough to find self-imprisonment logically sound. I wasn't going to be the reason someone else died. Her name was Gail. She'd been the sole BLM custodian for this maintenance yard for 3 years. She'd watched the outbreak reach her sector through the radio and the dust clouds of vehicles fleeing up the highway. When the first infected had walked into her yard, a man in a business suit, no shoes, a bite wound on his neck so deep she could see the tendons. She'd climbed the grader to get above him and fallen. The infected man had eventually wandered away. She'd crawled to the office, locked herself in, and waited. We have 11 people at a survey shack 7 miles northwest, I said, and 3 more at the mine compound. We need to evacuate everyone. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood with Wanda's help and walked to the filing cabinet. She opened the bottom drawer with her good hand and pulled out a binder. BLM Emergency Coordination Maps. Every fire road, water cache, and emergency shelter within a 100-mile radius, including the ones that aren't on topo maps. She held it out. I've been out here for 3 years. I know roads that Google doesn't. We had vehicles. We had maps. We had a woman who knew every unpaved road in the basin. Can you drive with that arm? I asked. I've been driving these roads with worse. We sent Luis back to the survey shack in the first truck to load the crew. Wanda, Kip, and I stayed with Gail to study the maps and plan the route. The military radio traffic Brenda had intercepted was our target. If there was an operational base within range, it was our best chance. Gail confirmed that Creech Air Force Base was about 130 miles south, and that the BLM had a cooperative relationship with the base for land management purposes. She'd spoken to their range control office as recently as 6 months ago. If anyone's still operational, it's Creech, she said. They had drones, classified programs, perimeter infrastructure that could hold an army out, or in. We radioed Brenda. Brenda, we have transport. 2 trucks, enough for everyone. We're mapping a route south to Creech via BLM fire roads, bypassing the highway entirely. Copy. Her voice was different, tighter. Colton, I need you to listen. The yard situation has changed. They've started clustering around the equipment bay. I don't know what changed, maybe sound pattern, maybe coincidence. But my window is shrinking. We can be there in 90 minutes. Negative. Do not approach the compound. You don't have the capacity to clear 60 plus. 1 truck in the yard would be swarmed before you could stop. Then how do we get you out? You don't. I told you this. I told you from the start. Brenda. I have Jimenez and Dale with me. We have food. We have the reinforced bay. I have the radio. If the clustering disperses, we'll move on our own. If it doesn't, Colton, 11 of your people are alive because I cut that hoist. Do not undo that math by driving into this yard. I stood in the BLM office with the radio in my hand and felt the specific weight of a decision that would define every remaining day of my life. The woman who had saved us was asking me not to save her. Not out of sacrifice or martyrdom, out of arithmetic. Her math was right. I knew her math was right. And I hated every digit of it. I'll radio you our route. If we reach Creech and they're operational, I'm sending someone back for you. That's a deal I can live with, literally. You stay on this frequency. I'm not going anywhere, Colton. That's the whole point. I held the radio for a long time after she signed off. Kip was watching me. Wanda was studying the map. Gail was sitting on the cot with her broken arm cradled against her chest, watching all of us with the expression of a woman who'd spent 5 days alone in a locked room and understood silence better than anyone in it. We go south, I said. Now. Luis returned with the crew 2 hours later. 11 people compressed into 2 pickup trucks, with Gail in the lead vehicle navigating from memory and BLM binders. We drove south through a landscape that looked exactly like it always had, vast, dry, beautiful, empty, and did not look like the end of anything at all. The desert doesn't register human catastrophe. It doesn't mourn. It simply persists at its own scale, indifferent to the small, wet creatures moving across its surface in borrowed machines.